Few creatures inspire as much awe and majesty as the legendary unicorn. Powerful, untamable, beautiful, the unicorn represents the essential freedom of nature. Usually depicted as a large white horse, the distinguishing feature of this creature is the large helical horn protruding from the top of its head. The behavior of the unicorn is usually no different from that of other horses, and is only depicted as being slightly more intelligent, responding to the approach of virginal women. The myth of the unicorn is often fixated on the horn, made from a substance called alicorn, which is said to bear magical healing properties, apart from being an impressive trophy. Further additions to this myth sees the blood of the unicorn also capable of extending life. Bandages made from the hair of the unicorn are also magically endowed, and can heal any wound. Eminently fast, the unicorn is uncatchable. However, the virgin is said to have an enigmatic allure, which the unicorn simply cannot resist. Thus, virgins are often used to stall the flight of a unicorn, rendering it vulnerable to capture. Unlike most mythical creatures, the unicorn is seen as a symbol of hope and good fortune. It bears no ill will to the human beings who often harm it. This is an interesting inversion to many monster myths that sees humanity becoming the monster, where even the most pure amongst us are often what leads to the beast's demise. Consequently, the unicorn is often depicted as a metaphor for the freedom and untamed energies of nature, untainted by the actions and desires of man, until it is ultimately caught and killed. However, this equine creature is not the only version of the unicorn myth. While fragmentary, many cultures have developed their own unique interpretations. The Russian Indriksver, or Indrik beast, is a distorted pronunciation of Eidernerok, which is Russian for unicorn. It is described as a gigantic bull, with the legs of a deer, the head of a horse, and an enormous horn on its snout, and, according to legend, it is the largest mammal to have ever set foot on Earth. Moving south from Russia, India is home to the karkadan, a Persian name for an animal which resembles the European unicorn in many aspects, such as being subdued by virgins and bearing a magical horn. However, the biggest difference here is that of coloration, as the karkadan is black. This goes along with some other notable differences, such as being covered in scales and having the stature and build of a buffalo. The karkadan was eventually adopted by many Middle Eastern cultures as a creature of myth, finding depictions within Islamic and even Hebrew cultures. Interestingly, the word karkadan is sometimes used interchangeably with the word unicorn in European bestiaries. Islamic culture describes the shadavar, a carnivorous equine creature that plays music to lure its victims. The striking difference between the shadavar and the unicorn is attributed to the Egyptian natural historian Al-Damiri. Earlier interpretations of the shadavar sees it as no different from European unicorns, with a prized horn offered to kings, or having lutes created from their horns, which are said to produce either a cheerful or terribly sad melody. Further east in China, the kilin is a similar creature, but has undergone many physical changes. Originally similar in appearance to the karkadan, the kilin was a large behorned buffalo-like creature that was an omen of good fortune. The kilin was said to appear before the arrival or death of an illustrious ruler, and according to legend, a kilin appeared to the mother of Confucius before he was born. The physiology of the creature has changed over the centuries to resemble more of a dragon, and is often associated with luck and good fortune. In Japan, the unicorn analogue takes on a more violent role. The kirin, as it is called, is a fierce creature that seeks out criminals and impales them upon its horn. Appearing almost deer-like, it has not undergone as many alterations to its appearance as the kilin. However, it is sometimes depicted as a chimera, with a dragon's torso and a bull's tail. Unicorns have affected cultures all over the world in quite a significant way. Modern depictions finds the animal, more often than not, used to symbolize man's self-inflicted alienation from nature. Further modern depictions finds unicorns used infrequently in fictional works. Harry Potter, Legend, and the Witcher series all see the unicorn appear in some way and further expand upon the lore of the unicorn. In addition to obvious depictions, the unicorn has many analogues present in popular culture as well, such as Shadowfax from Lord of the Rings, the steed used by Gandalf to carry him swiftly around Middle-earth. Shadowfax is referred to as the Lord of Horses, who is impossible to outrun and utterly untamable, only allowing Gandalf to ride him due to their friendship and shared history. Despite what we may think of unicorns in our modern world, things were quite different in times past. The unicorn used to be considered more of a prize than a precious symbol, as is evidenced by the frequency with which the hunting of the unicorn is depicted. Indeed, an important aspect of the unicorn myth is the proliferation of the unicorn hunt in medieval culture, the most famous example of which is the Hunt of the Unicorn, a series of late Gothic tapestries presently kept in the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York. These tapestries depict a unicorn as it is chased by a group of men who are, initially, unable to capture it. At last, the unicorn stalls its flight for a maiden, whereupon it is attacked and captured by its pursuers, who bring the unicorn to a castle. Interestingly, despite supposedly being killed in these tapestries, the last in the series sees the unicorn alive and well, chained to a pomegranate tree. The blood on the unicorn in this panel is often interpreted as being the juice of pomegranates, having fallen on the creature as it remains tethered there. Various faux unicorn products were considered to be quite valuable. Oftentimes, the tusk of a narwhal was used as proof of a successful unicorn hunt. If these artifacts were not used for trophies, they were alternately turned into cups by various European rulers, who believed that the horn would, in this manner, mute all effects of any poison, as it was believed that these horns could purify any liquid and make it drinkable. The idea of horns bearing medicinal properties remains to this day. However, this takes the form of rhino poaching, which continues despite there being no evidence that the horn of a rhino has any medicinal value whatsoever. In Christian mythology, the aurochs was mistaken for a unicorn by scholars studying Hebrew depictions of that animal, which either neglected the second horn or merged them due to the perspective of the image. This confused connection can still be found today in the King James Version of Job.
Will the unicorn be willing to serve thee, or abide by thy crib? Canst thou bind the unicorn with band in the furrow, or will he harrow the valleys after thee? Wilt thou trust him, because his strength is great, or wilt thou leave thy labour to him? Wilt thou believe him, that he can bring home thy seed and gather it into thy barn?
Lastly, and most famously, Scotland has even adopted the unicorn as their national animal, demonstrating how valuable this myth is to our collective culture. The unicorn myth finds itself most often depicted in European and Western culture, and its origin is ascribed to the various pre-Roman tribes found throughout Europe. Indeed, many of the myth-soaked areas in the United Kingdom, such as Ireland and Scotland, hold dear their unicorn myths. However, evidence points to an Eastern origin for this creature. The earliest appearance of the unicorn sees it described in accounts by ancient Greeks traveling home from India. The most famous of these accounts comes to us from Cosmas Indicopleustes, or Cosmas the Traveller, a 6th century merchant Cosmas describes from second-hand accounts.
It's impossible to take this ferocious beast alive, and that all its strength lies in its horn. When it finds itself pursued and in danger of capture, it throws itself from a precipice, and turns so abruptly in falling that it receives all the shock upon the horn, and so escapes safe and sound.
Ctesias the Synodon, a 4th century Greek physician and historian, describes, from further second-hand accounts, an uncatchable creature with a single horn and white body. However, at this point, the general physique differs from that of Cosmas, in that the former mentions a more bull-like body, where Ctesias describes the more familiar equine form. Closer inspection of India and the greater Middle East sees many scholars and rulers referring to this creature. However, all of these accounts describe it as being quite bulky in form and dark in coloration. Many of the surviving descriptions come to us much later, starting at the 10th century, with Persian scholar Abu Rayhan al-Burun, who describes the Indian Karkadan.
The build of a buffalo, a black, scaly skin, a dewlap hanging down under the skin. It has 3 yellow hooves on each foot. The tail is not long. The eyes lie low, farther down the cheek than is the case with all other animals. On top of the nose there is a single horn, which is bent upwards.
The 14th century sees Ibn Battuta describe the Indian rhinoceros as a karkadan. Thus, when considered with Europe's interchangeable use of the word karkadan, as well as Abu Rayhan al-Burun's description of that creature, leaves little doubt that the unicorn finds its origin in the Indian rhino. It is hypothesized by many scholars, such as Odell Sleepard, that the massive variation we see in European myth is through simple decay and mutation of information, as it is passed by word of mouth and altered before it comes to settle in its written form, which is less prone to fluctuation. And this would appear to hold true when considering that the origin of the European myth came from Greek travelers returning from India. How does the unicorn myth differ from what is physically possible? Is it reasonable for a living creature to have the traits and abilities of the legendary unicorn? Many creatures today share various traits that we recognize in the unicorn. The Seminole rhino, for one, bears quite a striking horn upon its snout, and many antelope and deer have also evolved horns for various defensive and display purposes. When one considers the frequency with which animals are mistaken for the unicorn, it hardly seems far-fetched for the creature to be real. The narwhal, a marine animal, bears a helical tusk that is also very similar to the horn of a unicorn. This creature must be mentioned due to how often its tusk is purported to be a unicorn's horn. Initially, the equine form of a unicorn is quite common amongst mammalian animals. Thus, the general form of a unicorn is not entirely impossible to rationalize, and appears to be a focal point of convergent evolution in mammals. However, the skin of the unicorn is open to question, as it could quite easily be covered in fur, as most horses are, or it could resemble the karkadan, and boast scales instead, assuming an appearance more akin to that of the rhino. The matter of the horn becomes quite biologically complicated. Horn material consists mostly of keratin, with a bone root upon which the horn forms, and, when fully grown, horns are swept back in some way, possibly to deflect incoming energy away from the animal bearing the horn. This is quite different from the manner in which unicorns are then depicted, with forward-facing horns. Ironically, the only time physical protrusions tend to point forward, away from the animal, is when they take the form of a tusk, such as seen in the aforementioned narwhal, as well as elephants or boars. Due to the nature of tusks being an evolutionarily modified tooth, they usually form around the mouth area of the animal, which is again quite dissimilar to depictions of the unicorn. Examining the fossil record, it is difficult to find animals whose horns point forward. Even the famous Triceratops doesn't actually possess horns, as the protrusions from its skull consist of bone with evidence of venous activity, suggesting they were more for display purposes. Thus, we are presently left to conclude that the unicorn horn is either a tusk that points forward from the snout, or is swept back in some way from the top of its head. The final aspect of the myth would see medicinal properties added to the horn, which is quite difficult to explain, as horn material is hardly any different from hair or fingernails. One solution is perhaps present in the inclusion of silver in the diet of the unicorn. Silver, like copper, is known to have antibacterial properties, and an animal that takes advantage of these properties by actively consuming small amounts of silver would find itself less prone to gastrointestinal bacterial infections. And, when considering that colloidal silver is sometimes used for this very purpose, it's easy to see why an animal might crave silver. Hair is considered to be a minor excretory organ, and trace amounts of metals can even be found in human hair. With this in mind, it is not difficult to reason that small amounts of silver would make its way into the hair of the unicorn, and give it not only its silvery sheen, but also a horn that has minor antibacterial properties, in addition to being incredibly valuable. Indeed, the healing properties of bandages made from the tail hair would be hardly any different from that of modern-day plasters, which contain silver nanoparticles for their antibacterial effect. However, this hypothesis is only possible if the unicorn does indeed have a keratin-based horn and produces hair, which negates the possibility of one bearing a tusk. Ultimately, we are left with two possible versions of the unicorn. We can see that the shape and general traits of this creature are not beyond what might be considered reasonably conceivable. And though the magical properties of the horn are quite far-fetched, it is nevertheless quite entertaining to discover that even this aspect might be reasoned into existence. Fanciful inductions aside, the unicorn is nonetheless a beautiful symbol of purity, which inspires the imagination of people the world over to this day.